Deep in the dense, humid jungles of Vietnam, a helicopter lay in ruins, twisted metal smoking in the aftermath of the crash. Larry Earles, wearing a long red scarf, sprang from the cockpit, adrenaline coursing through him as he scanned the chaotic scene. Spotting a bomb crater just a few feet away, he sprinted for it, heart racing. His crew quickly followed. They formed a tight perimeter, each man stationed at a corner. Towering 20-foot elephant grass surrounded them like a suffocating wall, swaying ominously in the breeze. Larry's clammy hand gripped his .38 revolver, knowing how futile the pistol would be against a heavily armed enemy skulking through the trees, ready to capture the downed U.S. Airmen, or worse. As a troubled adolescent, Larry Earles was drawn into restless mischief. With school behind him, he needed a purpose, which led him to an Army recruiter. His heart was set on Vietnam, inspired by the daring exploits he'd seen in the 1968 John Wayne movie, The Green Berets. Larry enthusiastically supported the Vietnam War, feeling a strong calling to serve and protect the innocent. Reflecting on his mindset, he said, quote, "I was not well informed, didn't watch the news, didn't know the politics, didn't care about the politics. I believed in the American creed of protecting the innocent and fighting for freedom of the underprivileged people." Though he envisioned himself as a sniper, the recruiter told him that the Army needed helicopter pilots. Intrigued, despite having never flown, Larry embraced the challenge. Transitioning to flight school after basic training, he soon faced the daunting prospect of flying solo. Describing the anxious rush, quote, "I cannot tell you what kind of panic that puts into your system when the instructor pilot gets out of the aircraft." Despite the panic, Larry excelled. Still, no amount of training could fully prepare him for the brutal realities awaiting him in war. Larry Earles graduated from flight school in November 1968 and was immediately deployed to Vietnam. During his first few months, Larry crewed in a Bell UH-1 Iroquois helicopter, also known as the Huey. It had a troop capacity of 6 to 10 men and was armed with an array of machine guns, miniguns, rocket pods, and air-to-ground missiles. It was in the Hueys that Larry truly experienced the horrors of war. The deafening sound of enemy fire, the fear of being struck down, and the stark realization that he was now a target. Recalling his first impressions of Vietnam, he said, quote, "One distinct memory I have was when I arrived in Vietnam and was in the Hueys for the first couple of months. Actually engaging the enemy and firing weapons was the first experience I had with somebody shooting back at you, and that gives you a totally different concept and feeling." In the slow, cumbersome Huey, Larry Earles found himself perilously close to the enemy. Yet his daredevil spirit craved even closer encounters. Soon, he would pilot the nimble OH-6A Loach, an agile light observation helicopter that would strike fear into the hearts of North Vietnamese forces. On April 28, 1969, the heat of the South Vietnamese jungle mixed with the ever-present danger of the battlefield. For Larry Earles, still just a 19-year-old Army helicopter pilot, the day began as just another recon mission, skimming the treetops over the notorious Aw Shaw Valley. But as his Loach started through the dense canopy, a sudden call for help crackled over his radio. In an instant, chaos erupted. A U.S. Air Force F-4 Phantom, armed with air-to-ground missiles and twin afterburners, was reduced to a ball of flame. As Earles recalls it, quote, "I glanced out to the right and saw an F-4 Phantom fighter bomber roll over on fire and explode." His heart sank. He knew the odds weren't good for the two-man crew. But then, through the swirling smoke, he spotted a glimmer of hope. One of the crew members, Marine Captain Floyd Massey, had ejected, his parachute drifting down toward the unforgiving terrain below. With the agility only a Loach could provide, Earles banked hard, his eyes scanning the jungle floor through the thick, triple canopy foliage. There, through the maze of trees, was Massey, struggling to free himself from his parachute, but alive. Earles brought the Loach in low, maneuvering with precision as the downed airman climbed the trees, disconnected from his chute, and wrapped his arms around the skids of the helicopter. The clock was ticking, but the mission wasn't over. Massey, barely catching his breath, pointed out where Captain Joe Garzik, the F-4 pilot, might have gone down. Earles wasted no time. With Massey gripping the skids, Earl weaved through enemy territory, dodging potential anti-aircraft fire and lethal ground assaults. Soon, they located Garzik. Earles expertly extracted the pilot, racing against time and enemy forces. The Loach's rotors whirred as they flew back to Firebase Rahakasan and then onward to Camp Eagle, home of the 101st Airborne Division. The mission continued as Earles ferried the rescued men to Chulai, dodging Viet Cong airfire and even U.S. naval gunfire. Upon arrival, the Black Knight's commander greeted him with a heartfelt welcome and a six-pack of cold beer. Such a small victory would have sent any pilot home after a single tour with a happy conscience, but not Larry Earles. With one tour under his belt, Larry Earles was more determined than ever to complete his service and build a future with his girlfriend, Nora. To him, the best way to ensure that his future was clear was to volunteer for a second tour in Vietnam, finish his military service, and then come home, ready to start a family. Despite her initial reluctance, Nora understood his decision. She agreed to wait for him. But this second tour would push Earles to his limits. It was during this time that he was shot down 7 times. His missions had shifted. Now he was flying hunter-killer operations, a dangerous and high-stakes strategy designed to seek out enemy forces and eliminate them. Earles piloted a Loach with its dangerous payload, a 400-pound JP-4 fuel tank. Risks were ever present. An aircraft fire could ignite the fuel and turn the helicopter into an inferno in seconds. But that didn't stop him. His Loach was fast, agile, and perfectly suited for navigating the dense, mountainous terrain of northern Vietnam, where the enemy lurked, hidden beneath the thick canopy. Flying low and slow, Earles would search for any signs of enemy movement, trails, caves, even the faintest hints of activity. His job as the hunter was to draw the enemy out, knowing full well that once they fired, his team would be an exposed, flying target. His Loach had a door gunner, ready to defend the aircraft as soon as the enemy made their move. As soon as enemy fire erupted, Earles' door gunner would toss a smoke grenade, a calculated move to obscure their location and evade incoming fire. That was the cue for the Cobra gunship flying overhead. Equipped with devastating firepower, the Cobra would swoop in, laying down a relentless barrage of rockets and bullets on the enemy position. With the enemy engaged, Earles would immediately radio for reinforcements. The blue team, infantry carried in by Hueys, would arrive, ready to land and confront the enemy in close combat. Every one of the 7 times Earles was shot down, he counted on the swift response of his fellow pilots. Rescue teams were typically on the scene within 30 to 45 minutes, their arrival a welcome relief. But not every rescue mission went off smoothly. During a routine recon mission, his Loach took a direct hit. Larry Earles knew something was wrong the moment he saw white smoke trailing from his Loach. He managed to keep the damaged helicopter airborne for 15 minutes, pushing his machine to its limits. Radio chatter from the other aircraft tailing him kept howling through his intercom. White smoke meant fuel burning. Earles had a moment's relief, knowing that the situation was manageable, as it meant that nothing mechanical had gone up in flames. But Earles knew it was only a matter of time before things got worse. A few moments later, the voice on the radio cut through again, this time with urgency. The smoke had turned black. Black smoke meant something else was on fire, something serious, like the engine or vital components of the aircraft. The situation was escalating fast. Earles, gripping the cyclic with white knuckles, glanced at his instruments. His flight capability was dropping fast. His Loach was barely holding together. Ahead was the last mountain range before the rice paddies, the flatlands where he had a chance to set down. But he had to make it over the ridge first, with his aircraft deteriorating by the second. His crew chief, positioned at the door with his M60, was yelling over the intercom that they needed to get on the ground now. They could feel the Loach struggling, fighting gravity with every passing moment. Earles had no choice but to make a desperate descent. With precision, he dropped the helicopter off the side of the mountain, skimming the rocky terrain before leveling out just in time to slam it down hard into a rice paddy. The second the skids touched down, Earles and his crew chief were already on the move. Both men dove out of the right-hand side of the Loach, sprinting full tilt across the soggy paddy. He described, quote, "The crew chief and I came out of the same right-hand side of the aircraft, came out running from the aircraft, and it exploded, very much like a movie-type scenario, and we were hurled to the ground. But we weren't burned. We weren't injured in any way." Earles had just narrowly escaped with his life, once again dodging peril in the unforgiving skies of Vietnam. On a high-stakes mission deep in enemy territory, Larry Earles and his crew chief were tasked with searching for North Vietnamese army activity in a volatile zone. Flying low over the dense jungle, scanning for signs of movement, Earles spotted something, a faint trail snaking through the trees, disappearing into a dark cave. His instincts kicked in. This was no ordinary path. He circled the area, radioing ground units to investigate. As soldiers moved in, tension hung in the air. They breached the cave's entrance, rifles at the ready. When their vision adjusted to the dark, they saw a stockpile of rocket-propelled grenade launchers, AK-47s, and an NVA flag. Earle's sharp eyes and quick thinking had led them to a major discovery, crippling the enemy's ability to strike American forces in the region. The ground units, victorious, presented the captured NVA flag to Earles and his crew, a testament to their crucial role in the mission's success. The event also made Earles infamous among the enemy ranks. They would soon see him as a prime target. One day, intel came through the wire that would have shaken any ordinary pilot to their bones. The North Vietnamese had put a bounty on his head, alive or otherwise. It was an immediate threat, hanging over every mission he flew. The enemy knew his name, his face, and they wanted him gone. Instead of cowering, Earles upped his bravado. He sent for a 6-foot-long red scarf from his girlfriend in El Paso, Texas. The reason, he explained, was that, quote, I wrapped it around my neck and assumed the persona of Snoopy in the Red Baron. I was telling the NVA to take their best shot. Flying into enemy skies, with the scarf whipping in the wind, Earles defied the bounty, turning their threat into a challenge, daring them to find him. Not long after, enemy guns would indeed hit the mark. It was a routine reconnaissance mission. Earles was expertly navigating through the dense foliage of the jungle. Suddenly, a volley of enemy fire struck the helicopter, sending it spiraling out of control. Alarms blared, and Larry's heart raced as he fought to regain stability, but the damage was too severe. With a bone-rattling thud, the chopper crashed into the underbrush, the impact jarring every bone in his body. As the dust settled and smoke billowed from the wreckage, Larry and his crew scrambled from the cockpit, adrenaline pumping. They barely had a moment to assess their surroundings before spotting a bomb crater just 5 feet away, their only refuge from potential danger. Without hesitation, they dove into the crater, hearts pounding, as the helicopter smoldered behind them. Hidden in the crater, they formed a tight perimeter, each man stationed in a corner, surrounded by towering 20-foot-high elephant grass that swayed gently in the breeze. The air was thick with tension and the acrid scent of burning fuel. Larry's sweaty hand gripped his .38 revolver, aware of its inadequacy against any potential assault. The men listened intently as the jungle buzzed around them, every sound amplified in the suffocating silence. Time dragged on. For 3 agonizing hours, they remained crouched in their makeshift shelter. Finally, the sound of rotors slicing through the air signaled their rescue. Larry Earles had defied the enemy and mortality once again.